Hello and welcome to the Summer of Love. I'm your host, Mia Saenz. And in this episode, you get to meet Barry Selby. Now you'll probably recognize him, not just from being out there in our world, but also being one of my favorite people to interview. So welcome, Barry. It's good to have you. I, I
You're welcome. Thank you for that wonderful. Uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Edification. No, love. That'll do.
yeah. I love that we talk about this all the time, that you're a man in this industry, right? Because a lot of males can't speak about self-love, one in the way in which you do, but also just period, they're just not comfortable with it. So it's really beautiful that you have that skill and that ability and all that. So thank you. So we start
Thank you.
off with about your experience on how you discovered self-love. Sometimes it can be, there's that moment in time where it's like, dang, that was enough of a life that, was before me, and now I'm stepping into this. Do you want to share your experience into self-love?
Yeah. So a little context for those who don't know me. I am actually English, not American, even though I live in LA and we've known each other for a long time, originally in LA. So coming from England, I came from a very reserved, stoic, Jewish, white bread family, to be blunt. Now the good news was there wasn't any drug addiction, alcohol addiction, abuse, any of that sort of stuff. The bad news was there wasn't much emotional expression. So I grew up in a family that, my dad and I never hugged, because that was his wall. He didn't know how to climb over. I didn't know it wasn't working, so I just thought that was normal. So I tended to be like that growing up myself, being somewhat, I won't say disconnected, but not being very expressive or loving, that sense, around people who weren't my primary relationship or family. Fast forward to being in the States for a few years. I remember vividly being in one of the advanced seminar. I've been in the seminar business, trainings, personal growth for many, many years. And very early on in the late 80s, I remember being in a particular seminar where I got confronted with my lack of appreciation of who I was. I got really nailed to the cross, so to speak. Being Jewish, that's kind of funny. To be being as self-critical as I was. And I didn't realize I had been, because I never got the reflection of that. But I've been carrying that for years, and I think most people have this voice or voices inside that critique ourselves, and not necessarily positively. In fact, often not. So when I got confronted with that, and my walls of resistance, which was that defense mechanism, fell down, like I could feel them fall down around me, I came face to face with the fact that love was the only thing I had left inside of me, in the sense that without those protections, there was nothing stopping love flowing in and out. And what happened for me was I let love in a way I never had before, from people around me, but more importantly, from myself. And that shift, even though it didn't stick forever, just to be transparent, I had to go through a few more levels to make it more practiced. But it was the first clue, first exposure. And also, again, being a man, as you were saying, I was in a seminar where it was probably 25% of the group were men. So in some ways, it was the women that were the placeholders for me, because there was that feminine energy surrounding me, not knowing that's what it was. They really gifted me that place. It truly was the walls coming down about my judgments and toughness that I was carrying, trying to be a man, that really allowed the love to flow through. And the secret I discovered afterwards, by the way, is that I had more power in the love than I did in the strength. And that was a real big wake up for me.
Very, very, very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting when we hit that spot that we say something's not working. I have to go discover it, or I have to move into it. How did that look for you? That step into the new life, so to speak, into the arena of self-love. Was
Well,
it
the thing,
was it clumsy?
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It wasn't something I was like, I need to strategize and plan and do this. It was really, I mean, it's kind of like well, one way I'm visual I have, and it's not going to be necessarily very inspirational, but the truth was I felt like I was walking on the edge of a cliff and I fell off. Like I fell into the arms of love in a sense. And the truth was, it was really the answer to a prayer I didn't know I had, because I've been looking for love outside all the time. And I talk about this in my own work, that, you know, we're always looking for love outside to fill us up. And what I discovered was that when I had stopped doing that and let the love in from love out from inside, so to speak, then the love from outside came more easily, because I was basically resonating with it. It wasn't me feeling like an empty vessel wanting to be filled up from outside. And again, wasn't 100% on board with it all the way through from the beginning. But however, it became a talisman for me, or a connection that kept me coming back into it. So over the years, I've become more practiced and staying in that centered place inside of myself. And the love around me is more abundant, not necessarily romantically, just people I find myself in caring connection with. And it's easy to love people who I don't even know, because I'm not looking to get anything, which is a big key, by the way. I'm just being generous and kind and compassionate to other people, which is love. And their lives might get better. I don't know if it will. I'm not trying to do that, but the ripple effect has impact.
That's very powerful, to not be afraid and to step forward, to be love, right? In that space, which is the truth. We have to discover it within ourselves first, like you're saying, before we can express it or even feel it from the outside world. And so to be able to step forward in that loving capacity without expectations, like you said, is almost unheard of until you do the work, right? Until you recognize that it's not about an egoic state of being, it's about a connection, a depth. Yeah, really beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's also doing the work to shed the stuff that's in the way of that. I mean, that's really what I've been doing for years, is to make peace with, to resolve, to release, to unpack or unload all that stuff I've been carrying for years that was all my own baggage, for want of a better word.
Right.
Because love is easier to express when there's not much all the stuff in the way of it.
So I'm going to ask you a question, because you're one of the perfect people to answer it. In self-love, and also in the summer of self-love here that we're talking about and sharing our life with the readers and the viewers and all of it, as a spiritual man, which you've been a form of a spiritual man that's transformed, right? You were raised Jewish, and then you went into a spiritual type of experience. How do you find the connection of your own spiritual awareness with your self-love path?
Ooh, that's a deep question.
It is. I'm a deep girl.
Yeah, you got skills. I've been on, just again, adding to the context of my background, I've been on the spiritual journey for a few decades now, and I've been immersed in deep work for many years, becoming a spiritual counselor myself. So for me, the underlying theme of spirituality for me is about love, because for me, the understanding I have of spirit, God, whatever you want to call it, is that is love. It isn't some judgmental fire and brimstone type entity up in the clouds, you know, passing judgment. The God that I subscribe to, for want of a better word, is one that is kind and compassionate, and is a representation that we carry inside ourselves. I also have this sense that there isn't some entity or God out there. It's actually something inside of all of us that we're like, kind of like, basically some science fiction nut, kind of like the Force in Star Wars. We all carry it. So that love, spiritual love, and calling it divine love, which we carry, is the same thing. You know, this is separate from romantic love, and of course, there's other forms of love too, for family, for love for animals, love for your work, that sort of thing. But for me, the true love inside of ourselves is connected through our own beingness into what I call divinity or spirit. So for me, it's very connected.
Beautiful. And I knew you were the person to answer that. Because really it's a whole body, mind, and spirit experience. And most people don't understand. And so as we're sharing the depths of the summer of self-love, why not talk about the spiritual side, right? We've talked about the interior, the mind, the emotional, all of that with the self-love. And the spiritual side has its beautiful guided place. And then there's also the whole healing of the body and all of that stuff, which is beautiful, because Lori will be talking about that and you're talking about this. So it's very balanced, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. So share with us 3 tools that you like to share with your people.
3 tools. Oh, can I just do 3 tools?
You can share more.
I think,
but
well, my book has 50, so I've got to be somewhat, reticent on keeping them down to 3. No, so, I mean, one of the biggest things that gets in the way of love for us is usually our judgments. So one of the tools I recommend for clients is being self-aware. And it sounds so simple. Self-aware, easy, no problem. But reality is, when we're aware of ourselves and we notice what we're telling ourselves, we can change it. Because for me, awareness is always the first step. Because you can't fix something if you're not aware what it is, what the problem is. So being aware of our own self-talk and voices is the first step towards love, because we notice when we start going, I shouldn't have done this, or whatever that negative expletive is we talk about ourselves. When you catch yourself saying that to yourself, the second piece is to say something different. So first step is awareness and self-awareness. The second tool is to choose different words, change the language. So if I say to myself, I'm this, this, and this, I can say, you know what, I'm not, I'm that instead. So you start to change the languaging. The third one, just for simple, let's give the deep stuff out first, is to learn the skill of forgiveness. Forgiveness is a skill I had to learn myself, and I've taught it to my clients many, many times, that it isn't about somebody else. Forgiveness is for ourselves. I know it's different in the Catholic faith, and other rules in religion talk about, it's God's role to forgive. And I get people upset when I say God doesn't forgive. And they're like, what? It's like, because God doesn't judge. We judge, so we need to forgive. So self-forgiveness, because again, it's about us, not other people, because any judgment we carry about somebody else is inside of us. So it's self-forgiveness that is the homework. So that's my real big preach. It's like, forgive yourself and forgive yourself always, because we're the ones that carry the judgments that get in the way of us loving ourselves. So forgiveness accesses love, and that frees us up to be more full, more whole, more joyful.
These are some pretty in-depth, cool tools. I have to, because we have all levels of self-love, right? We've got those entering, we have those who are going into mastery of it, those who are proficient. So it's really beautiful to have that balance. So thank you. I do want to talk about the self-forgiveness, because that's probably one of the hardest for humanity to move through. And I also have to say that I love how you said God doesn't forgive. I jolted there too when you said that. And so for a second, I was like, what? And then as you said, there's no judgment. And that's exactly right. Just like when you and I say to our clients, there's no shame, blame, judging, none of that. Well, why would God, now we put it in the reference of the God, and then it takes on a whole different aspect, a bigger, higher clarity that we must learn to forgive ourselves. Yeah. Share with us, there wasn't a question there, sorry. So share with us a little bit more. What kind of a specific tool would you suggest to somebody along their path of forgiveness?
Well, I learned forgiveness through my master's degree when I went through my spiritual psychology background, and I have a write-up that's in my book, and it's other places too, about how to go through forgiveness, which is very simple. Although I do recommend a book that's been out for quite a while by Colin Tipping called Radical Self-Forgiveness. His first book was called Radical Forgiveness, but then he rewrote it as Radical Self-Forgiveness because he got the message.
Mhm.
So if you get that book, there's also a handout on his website, I think. I think it's radicalforgiveness.com, maybe. I'm not sure. But Colin Tipping, Tipping, is a guy who wrote the book. He has a whole template for that, which is really good as well. But the essence of it for me, what forgiveness is about, is first of all, recognize and be aware of the judgments we're carrying against ourselves or against other people, because the judgments are still inside of us, whichever direction they're pointed at, outside or inside. The second piece is to recognize, first of all, they're not accurate, because they're not. Something happened, and we then put a label on top, which is judgment.
Mhm.
Or something happened to us and we judge it. So even those things that we think we can never forgive, and this is the key, it's again not about what the other person did to you or didn't do to you. It's your own opportunity to forgive yourself so you can free yourself up. So first of all, notice what the judgments are. Secondly, to recognize that you are not, how to put it, what happened to you isn't you. What happened to you was about you. So you
Mhm.
separate the two. So remember, you are still pure, and inside you're okay. I do a lot with compassion with my clients too, because self-compassion, which is part of self-love, is one of the best lubricants, for a useful term, to let forgiveness happen. So
Mhm.
being compassionate with yourself, because you can say, "Oh, I forgive myself for doing this and that and the other." It's like that doesn't work, because it's mental.
Mhm.
Compassion has to come from the heart, and that's the loop. That's what brings forgiveness into the heart. Because when you forgive yourself from a place of compassion and kindness, it sticks. The forgiveness works, and the forgiveness and the judgment dissipates. So those are the thematics of how to do the forgiveness. So that helps.
It's beautiful. Really, really beautiful. Yeah. And forgiving ourselves allows for those of you who are struggling with the shame and continuing to blame yourself. It really is about releasing that, because when you start to forgive yourself, the shame starts to dissipate away. And that's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah,
It's not supposed to linger and stay. It's supposed to almost evaporate like water on a hot day, right? Yeah,
there you go.
I
Yeah.
love that. That's beautiful. Okay, great. Now, we were just talking about the shame and judgments, right? And so one of your first thing was the self-awareness, self-talk, and the voices. And so let's dig in a little bit deeper about this well, let's not jump into the judgments, because we all know what judgments are. Let's talk about the self-awareness. The self-awareness is the key to self-love. It's self-responsibility, right? It's aware of who you are and what's going on, and you're not blaming anyone else. So when was when was the first time that you were self-aware? No, when this is a good point to show people, if you can remember
Mhm.
when the first time you had that self-awareness that you needed to be more gentle to yourself, which is self-love.
So many opportunities, and examples. Well, I'll go back to that moment I mentioned earlier about that seminar I was in, because in that process of having the walls coming down, that was the first time I really got viscerally how much of a burden I've been carrying, which wasn't necessary. How much I saw, I was aware of, I felt the the imprisonment I put myself basically in just falling away, and it was visceral. And that experience, which is really now I understand was part of the self-forgiveness practice, even though I wasn't doing forgiveness in that moment, it was the feeling of letting go of the blaming or the judgment I had for myself, the shame I was carrying, that wasn't true. And one of the things I became aware of is that it's not mechanical. It was something that was so effortless in a way once I stopped clinging to it. Because the problem is, for many of us, and I did for myself, is we tend to use judgments as our structure or as our cage we put ourselves in. One of my favorite books I recommend actually about judgment is a book by Richard Bach called Running from Safety.
Mm.
And in that book, and I've read Richard Bach's books ever since I read the first one, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, when I was a teen. But in Running from Safety, he talks about his journey to find his inner child, and how the inner child is in this prison cell that he didn't realize he created. And the whole journey through the book is where he gets to the point where he realizes that the judgment that created the prison the door had a key in it that was on the inside. And forgiveness was the key that he opened the door to let himself be free of the judgments. So that imagery, that the way the book tells it, and I know I probably butchered the actual way to describe it, was such a beautiful book to recognize that we are the ones who have the key, the choice, the opportunity, not the mastery to free ourselves. Because judgment is a self-inflicted, I won't say wound, but self-inflicted imprisonment.
So, do you remember the name of Richard Bach's book?
Yeah, it's called Running from Safety.
Okay, because as a girl, there was being raised metaphysically. A lot of people were like, you got to read Jonathan Livingston Seagull. You got to read. I never read anything like that. But I'm well aware that he's, a metaphysical writer and transformational writer. But what you said is exactly how I lived my life. So I lived self-composed prison. So literally, my bedroom was, I think, 10 by 14. And I used to call it my cell. And due to my mother's crazy mental state and how she treated us, I learned to go, unfortunately, within and to be subdued and introverted to avoid outbreaks of anger from her if my energy was too excitable or whatever. So I stopped playing with toys when I was 8 years old in the 3rd grade. And that's why I said I lived in a prison cell, because I never did anything that I liked to do. Like my brothers and sisters played music, but it would get taken away if they got in trouble. So I never wanted to go love music and have it taken away. So until I was 18, I actually had a real hard time at 18 years old on my birthday, because I knew, or at least this was my conception, that once I hit 18, I could literally go into a real prison cell that was maybe worse than the one I was in now. And that frightened me. But that also started my journey on who I was, who I am today. So I've never heard that about that book. And I am just so tickled pink, because that is so, we all have similarities. That's that story that, we've said before to people, you're not alone. You're deeply loved and you're a miracle. And so that's proof right there that we are not alone. I never read that book. I lived my life like that. And wow, that's sort of like, not that I'm there now, but even healing the past, right? My past, that brings sunshine in what you just shared to me. It's like, I wasn't alone even back then. So that was really beautiful. Thank you. Wow, really, really powerful.
Welcome.
Yeah, I love self-awareness, because it's the most gratifying experience when we get to see that we are now out of a situation, or it no longer belongs to us, right? Really, really beautiful. And of course, once again, like everything, these move super, super fast between you and I, these conversations, and we're just about through with our time. What would you like to share with everybody before we say goodbye?
Boy, kind of taking an idea from what you said about how we're all miracles, in the sense that I wouldn't say necessarily we're all miracles, but we're all available to the love and the miracle that we are. Mm-hmm. Many of us, and I'm including myself, have carried around, again, judgment, self-blame, shame, guilt, all sorts of stuff for things that may have happened when we were younger. They either, one, aren't true, or two, just simply aren't relevant anymore. That we're still carrying a judgment when we're 5 years old that that was still impacting our life, but not because it's true, but because we think it should be true. And so we each have not so much the opportunity, but the responsibility to make peace with that, to love ourselves enough to free ourselves from that prison that we put ourselves in, so we can enjoy life fully, we can love fully, and we can be a loving participant in the world. So it's worth doing the work.
Yeah, and remember, the key is on the inside of the cell. I love that you said that.
Absolutely.
Because I didn't live that way. It's beautiful.
No, and most don't,
Yeah. Yeah. Until they recognize, oh, I can actually get out of here. Yeah. Really.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Barry, so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk with you on air. And I've
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
interviewed you a lot and also on radio too. So that's really cool. Because this is my tenure on my self-love video shows. So Rob, yeah.
Nice.
And thank you all for joining us. And Barry and I, we know we'll see you in another talk because we do lots of them together. So much. Bye.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Bye.
Again, it's not stopping the recording.